Hello, brothers and sisters. It's your boy BC coming at you with another video. Welcome back to Based LDS. I'm glad to have you here with me, and I hope I say something that matters. And I want to ask you a question. Upon what foundation are you built? And I ask this because it ties a little bit into the previous video I made on the young men and the youth. And it ties into what you see happening as far as people leaving the church. And it ties into whether you're happy or not in your life. So what is your foundation? What is your faith built on? And my hope is that your answer was, I am built on a foundation of Christ. That you have a testimony of Christ in your heart and in your head at all times, and that you pray to keep it, and you pray that it will be enlarged. And I share this because I think this is why we're seeing turnover in the church, is that people are not converted to Christ. They're converted to a doctrine or an idea. I'm watching a lot of YouTube and I'm watching a lot of church videos, and because I like church videos, a lot of the recommends are why I left the Mormon church, what the Mormons get wrong, and with the people who have left the church that are making videos on why they've left, it breaks my heart. And this is my observation, this is my judgment from what I see and what I hear. They're leaving because their testimony was in the church or in a thing or in a person and not in Christ. And so you're like that nursery rhyme. You're either built upon the sands or you're built upon the rock. And when the storms come, if you're on the sand, you get washed away. But if you're on the rock, your house stays standing still. People leave the church because they don't agree with how Joseph transmitted the book of Abraham. And they believe the stupid stories about how he translated the book of Abraham. Like, oh, it's just the book of breathings. You look into that more. The church isn't true because concrete and steel. Because there's no Jewish people in the Indian population. Because Joseph Smith used a stone in a hat. Because he dug for treasure. And they put themselves on this path out of the church. And I do say they put themselves on a path out of the church. I don't think they're insincere. I think they're well-meaning. I think they believe what they're doing. But I do believe they're missing the mark. From the Book of Mormon, the Jews missed the mark. And the church does not bring salvation. The church does not bring happiness. The church does not bring, you get the idea. Christ does all those things. When I'm in the military, I start looking for some meaning and purpose to life, and somehow there has to be a God came into my head. If there's meaning, it's because there's a God. And I went looking for a true church, but I went looking for a true church that God represented, that represented God. I was looking for God, not religion. I just thought there would be a religion that would lead me to God. So I spent a year and a half looking at other churches, religions, Christian, non-Christian, all over the place. And when I received my witness of the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon, it's because I prayed and said, if there's a God and if you're there and if this is your church, let me know. I was looking for a witness of God. I was asking about the Book of Mormon. I was asking about Joseph Smith. I was asking about the Latter-day Saints. But I was asking if they were the road to God. And that, I think, is where people go wrong. And this is why I think sometimes we're left spiritually afloat, is we're asking for the wrong things in our prayers. We are amiss. Our focus is off. So when I got into the church, when I started getting active in the church and involved, it's because I knew there was a God. And when doctrines came up that I had trouble with, like maybe you've heard my previous video about getting anti while in the MTC and not knowing anything about the scriptures, that could have wrecked me. That could have and should have sent me home and out of the church forever. But my testimony and my faith was not in the church. It was in God. And that God had answered my prayers, not the church. And that I was dealing with the arguments of men. And those arguments were never going to be as strong as my witness from God. I have heard, this is Jacob Christensen, I think Jacob over at Thoughtful Faith, say the same thing, that when he went through a faith crisis, it didn't wreck him because his testimony was in Christ, not the church. Now I'm going to say this, I never went through a faith crisis. I did not go into a faith crisis. I did, but it was not because I doubted the church or I doubted God. It was I doubted me and my ability to live it. Because I failed for a while at being a good member. Horrifically failed. But I never doubted the church, and I never doubted God. I knew there was a God, and I knew this was his church because he told me that. I just doubted my ability to live the commandments. And there were some things, I realized now I was asking for the wrong things. Excuse me, it's late. But because I had my faith in God, I kept trying to get back with him, to have a relationship with him. And so I could never completely leave the church or quit doing what I was doing once I had that witness. Again, I was not leading a right life at first. It took me a while, and I still struggle. Those same temptations and afflictions still come upon me. I just don't give in to them like I used to. And that's the thing, right? Who gives up and who doesn't? Who holds out? Who can weather the storm? I can sleep through a storm. I'm not worried about the tumultuous seas. Christ wasn't either. Because he knew in who he had faith. He knew he had a calling and a mission. Nothing was going to happen to him for a while, until a set time and place. So I don't worry about the church or certain policies, whether they make the church true or not. I worry about, are these things of God? And for the most part, I can look in myself in the face, in the mirror, and go, yes, they are. And I don't bother other people to give me answers to things I don't understand, rely upon their knowledge, because I know that's not where true knowledge of God comes from. I like scholarship. I like reading. I like learning things. I love the scriptures. But when I want to know about God, I ask God. What better source? And so I want to share a story. So reading all the anti on my mission, funnily enough, helped me. Because I got out there and there were a lot of people who'd been antied, and I could deal with their questions. I was aware of what the literature said. And so I could at least handle some conversations. Once I got a little bit more mature with my scriptures, I could handle conversations better than some of my companions could. And there was a gentleman, I'll refer to him as D. And D had a young family, wife, child on the way. And he had been antied hard. They hit him with the literature and the movies and the whole Tanner special. And I got called to his area, and they introduced me to D and his family. And the missionary's like, we've been working with this guy for a couple of years, and just nothing's happening. And he told me some of the stuff he'd seen and read. And I'm like, oh yeah, I know that stuff. And he's like, really? And I'm like, look, I don't know everything. Like, I'm 23. I was in the Navy. I didn't get active in church. So I'm limited what I can help you with. And we sat down. And for about 2 months, we would meet 2 or 3 times a week. And this maybe is not the best way of teaching, but my companion wanted nothing to do with the anti. And I don't blame him. But he would go in the kitchen, open door, but he'd go in the kitchen, sit with the wife, and Dale and I would sit down and we'd go through his pamphlets and his books and his stupid God Makers video. And I would just debunk everything to the best of my ability. And then he's like, I don't have any more questions. You've kind of, and I helped him to overcome his doubts. And he agreed to be baptized. Finally. And he asked me to baptize him. And I did. And he got set apart, confirmed, a member of the church. And I remember we're in the locker room changing out of our wet clothes. And I'm like, okay, D, how do you feel? And he just lit up like a little kid. And he's like, I feel so good. I am so full of the Spirit right now. I know this is what I should have done so long ago. I am so grateful. I know this is the truth. I know this is where I need to be. And he was floating on cloud 9. And the man was just exuberant. He was so lit up. He was so happy. And then a week after his baptism, I was transferred out. And then 3 or 4 months later, I got a phone call. And they're like, hey, I heard you were working with D. This is Elder so-and-so in P9, and I heard you're working with D. And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, he's got some crazy questions. We don't know what happened. He said you've gone over all this stuff with him, and now he has these doubts. And I'm like, man. And I tried to help the missionaries, but you're helping them over a phone from long distance. And D fell off, left the church, was done. And ran into D, his wife again, on Facebook years later, and she was just so hostile to the church. She was nice to me, but she was hostile to the church. And, I'm like, okay, this is just clearly not a good thing. And she had started coming after me, I just like, okay, have a good day. Tried for a few months, and she was just not having it. And it occurred to me that the problem D had was that he relied upon me for his spiritual witness and for me to fill in his intellectual blanks. that he could not, somehow he stopped remembering the Spirit he felt at his baptism, that the confirming witness that that Spirit gave to him, he stopped remembering. And isn't that the purpose of sacrament? To remember always. And that's when it occurred to me that there was no substitute for the Spirit, and that we had to ground ourselves in Christ and not in a doctrine or a dismissal of religious objections posted by the other side, because the winds are going to blow, and if you're not rooted on Christ, something's going to knock you over. Something's going to ruin your day. And so what do? What do you do if you lack that conviction? What do you do when the answers add up and the winds are blowing and you're not properly founded? You break. Your testimony breaks. You leave the church. Your mind grows dark. You forgot what you once knew, what you once believed, and you turn onto other paths. And again, these are not people inherently going to try out to be wicked. These are not people inherently trying to defy the church. These are people that just, their testimony, they may have borne testimony, but they had a testimony in a thing and not in Christ. They had a testimony of the great culture, of how hard the LDS worked. They had a testimony of acts of charity. They had a testimony of Joseph Smith, until they heard something bad about Joseph Smith. They had a great testimony of the works of the church, until they found out that the church has money and they don't understand why the church would have money. They have great faith until you get the idea, fill in the blank. And then their world starts to crumble. But how do you destroy someone who's founded on Christ? I don't think you can. I don't think you can tear someone down who's firm in the knowledge of Christ. I don't think you can tear someone down who's felt the Spirit and has that witness, that knowledge. And so, brothers and sisters, as you're moving forward in the coming days, because this is going to be true of all of us, there's got to be another apostasy. There has to be a falling away. And we're all going to be tested, and we're all going to be tried. Our hearts will be rent, because the Lord must have a tried people. And it's the saints he's got to try the hardest. And that's why so many, when they're not founded on Christ, they put other things ahead. And those things matter more, and they take precedence. But we are commanded to love God with all our might, all our mind, and all our strength. We're commanded to love God with our whole heart. So you cannot be divided. You cannot love God and some social justice movement. You cannot love God and also fight to be an ally with something morally objectionable. Even if you're not a member of that ally group, you're allying yourself with that ally group, and you are putting the priority for that allyship ahead of your devotion to Christ. And it's sad, and it's tragic. And I don't doubt our Father weeps at the choices we make, at the way we treat each other because of those decisions. So, brothers and sisters, I want you to know that I love God. I know He exists. I know that Jesus is his Son and that Jesus is the Christ. And that if we're founded upon Christ, we will weather the storms of life. We will weather the things that would knock us down and keep us from getting back up. But we must have that faith in him, and not in a book or a person, but in him. Anyway, that's all I have for tonight. I love you all. I hope you have a great weekend. Thank you so much. Thank you. Peace out.